come to talk about when waiting time is not wasting time. David was in a shape in Psalms 40. He was caught within the triangle of life, trying to go forward while looking back. He struggled with God's hand on his life because the man was being pushed by destiny. He had been caught up in the permanent will of God. He had been chosen when he was yet a lad, taking a simple lunch to his brothers. God had chosen him to fight the giant Goliath. And now he found himself operating under the oil of the anointing. When he was but 9 years old, a prophet knocked at his door and said to his daddy, "A king is in the house." Jesse became ecstatic and said, "In my house is there a king? Calls his boys, and they walk under the horn of the anointing, but the oil does not flow." David, the little Rudy one, the little one that everybody counted out. And that's the thing I get excited about, is that when folk count me out, God will count me in. It is the very people that were the black sheep in your family that your sisters and brothers have had to come to. The very ones who they said would never be nothing. You've had to go in your little money and ease them a few coins. The very people who said you would not make it, you were not voted the most one that would possibly succeed in your class. You may not have been with the honor group, but some of them very honor students, you see them now, they tore from the floor up. Y'all ain't liking this. So David was chosen now. He's chosen with the oil. He's operating under God's will in his life. What happens when God wills you beyond where you are? What happens when you're operating in a post-dated anointing, where you're headed where you hadn't been yet? What happens when God is transitioning your life? Stuff is happening that you don't really understand. David was caught in a situation where the haters, Miss T, came at him. He was caught up in a situation where people disliked him, not Jackie, because he had done something, but what he hadn't done yet. People were intimidated by him, and David found himself isolated. And let me tell you something. One thing about being anointed, it is lonely. I'm going to say it again. Somebody ought to be anointed. I said one thing about being anointed, it is lonely. It is something to hear from people and then hear from God. It is something when people put you under scrutiny, but they don't understand you, but you know that God understands you. You're on an assignment beyond their understanding and comprehension. They hadn't got it yet. That's why you have to be careful hanging around people that can't see where you're going. They keep banking on where you're being, but they don't understand what's about to be is better than what's been. They don't understand that you're about to walk into a place in your life that's going to blow their minds. And so here we are in a position seeing from the peripheral David saying some deep stuff. David had just come out of an encounter. He was now singing about waiting on the Lord. And I come to speak to some waiters today. I ain't talking to everybody, you know. I'm not talking to everybody in this place. I'm only talking to the waiters. I'm only talking to you who understand this waiting stuff. David said, I'm a certified waiter. And I need to get a tip to the waiters today. He said, I waited patiently for the Lord. I waited when I didn't understand. I waited when I was anxious. I waited when I was hurting. I was waited when I was isolated. I was lonely. But I waited patiently. And I understand what the enemy's doing. I understand the mind battles. I told you a moment ago, he's writing on the canvas of our minds. He's nudging us and saying, look, she's ahead of you. Look, he's accomplished stuff you ain't accomplished. Look, you're going to stay in this shit, and you begin to get bitter. God began to speak to me in this thing. He says, understand the difference between waiting time and wasting time. Because the truth of the matter is, there are many of us, Lord Wilson, who spend too much wasting time. We call ourselves waiting, and we ain't doing nothing but wasting. Because if we don't understand the directions of our wait, if we don't understand the determination in our wait, if we've not yet got a revelation of the destiny of our wait, we may not be waiting, we may be wasting. The only problem I got about wasting, anytime you waste, it's going to be a want. Anytime you spend your time wasting it with no goals, with no preempt, you just doing just to do. Because I'm going to be honest with y'all. There's got to be a purpose in your waiting. Look at somebody and say, what you waiting for? What are you waiting for the sky to fall? You wait, and ain't no way in the world good sense says you ain't going to work now job, no income, no kind of vocation, and you sitting there waiting for what? You're not a tither. You're not a giver. You living tore up from the floor up. What you waiting for? Because if you're not obedient, you couldn't be waiting on promises. Because promises are not to read Deuteronomy chapter 28. God began to speak to me about this waiting business. God spoke to me, and I'm going to give you these. David said, I waited patiently for the Lord. How many of us have established the relationship with God that dictates, he looks at us and says, Frank Vanderveer is waiting patiently. He said, my position of waiting, he inclined unto me and heard my cry. I believe that God evaluates our positioning, says, I believe I'm going to bless them in their waiting. God gave me three things, and I got to bring this thing on. I could sit here and talk about wasting, because I could take you to Luke chapter 15 and tell you about what happened to a boy one day when he wasted his substance. In riotous living, he wasted. And I want to warn the believers today, before you go to sleep on me, don't you waste time. I mean, God has done something for you. How you waiting and you ain't praying? How you waiting and ain't no fasting in it? What are you waiting on? How you waiting and there's no object of your wait? I mean, how do you wait when there is no specific design or biblical foundation or scriptural foundation for your waiting? You've got to be able to say, I waited for God. Now, some of y'all waiting for a man. Some of y'all waiting for a woman, for money, for a job. But until you learn how to wait on God. See, you want everything else. But the key is, why? Number one, let me give my points and get out of here. First of all, I want to talk about the matter of my waiting. I'm not waiting on what men can do. I have to understand that my relationship with God, and then that's important, church, that we get a revelation of God's ability. See, what the missing element is that many of us don't understand that he's sovereign. He's immutable. He's a God who can. See, the can of God ought to excite you more than the cane of God.